Hey, I'm here with my dad, Dan Callahan again. We're gonna do I think a three-part series on his experiences in Vietnam and kind of get going a little bit here and maybe just start by talking a little bit about your background. I think it's safe to say you came from humble beginnings and probably didn't look back when you hit the road for the Marine Corps.
I did, Jim. I left. I was typical of a lot of us Marines. I didn't really fit in. A lot of times I didn't get along. So I thought I just needed to be gone. And I enlisted on 120-day delay program in March of 1965. That was an interesting year, a lot of snow, a lot of flooding, record flooding that year. And I left mid-July for San Diego. It was either that or leave on my 18th birthday, and my parents finally agreed, so I took off, went to basic training. I didn't know if I was going to go to Paris Island or San Diego, but I ended up in San Diego because Minnesota is kind of the split line. They flew us out on a DC-7. It was my first flight on any airline anywhere, and it was quite an interesting experience. They kind of put me in charge of these 8 fellas that was with me, and I thought, boy, I'm going to be off to a good start. Well, we got off the airplane and I got to the airport, and the DI spotted me, and I held it up and I said, that's all I said. He took them and he threw them on the floor, pinned me against the wall, and says, I don't give a such and such who you are. You're ours now. You'll keep quiet. You'll only speak when you're spoken to, and you belong to us.
Why the Marine Corps?
Well, the Marine Corps appealed to me because I thought I needed to prove myself. I liked the uniform. A lot of people did. I knew it would be challenging, and it certainly was for me because the sun had a drastic effect on me going through basic training. I was just a ball of blisters. I didn't look anything like a picture postcard Marine by the time I was done, but I did make it. It was difficult, but I had blisters from head to toe.
So, after you got through basic training, at what point did you decide that number one, air traffic was going to be your, shall we say, specialty or career? And then I know you voluntarily went to Vietnam. How did that transpire?
It all came about because I wasn't a good student in high school. I didn't pay attention. I probably started drinking too much beer at an early age, having a good time with the rest of them. So I didn't know where I'd end up. Some people, including parents, thought they had a career path for me that was vastly different than what I thought. I actually came upon air traffic by accident. When I finished Camp Pendleton, I had 2 days to go. I ended up with pneumonia, pneumonitis of my left lower lobe. I had to lie and say I had dysentery because they didn't believe you if you had a cold. But the West Coast air at Camp Pendleton got to me. I guess I was out for about 3, 4 days before I came to, and they kept me in the hospital for 2 weeks and delayed my orders. And then after they cured us, they kept us there as workers. And we had to scrub with toothbrushes and all that stuff. So it was all by design. That was my first exposure to Vietnam, and seeing some of the veterans return early in 1965 was a little earth-shattering and shocking, because a lot of us didn't pay a whole lot of attention to Vietnam before we went in. We were just busy having fun. I ended up finally getting to Memphis, Tennessee, but they had lost my records. They misplaced them because they passed me on. I was far enough along and they cut the training. So they said, you're done. But my records didn't follow me. So I languished in Memphis for about 3, 4 months, waiting for them to find my orders. And then once they did, they put me through screening and testing. And I didn't know how I would do. I had no idea because by then I didn't have a whole lot of self-confidence. So I I thought I'd end up being a machine gunner on a helicopter, and that was fine with me. I didn't care. But I found out I qualified for all of the schools that they had available, avionics, electronics, and all that other stuff, and even airborne navigator, which they had in the Marine Corps as enlisted. But they only had one every 3 months, and they were full. Otherwise, I might have done that. But anyway, I ended up in air traffic because I'm a farm kid. I used my hands, I shoveled manure and corn. I still spread manure, it's in a different way. But what happened was I didn't want to get into electronics or avionics because I wasn't any good at that. I remember in industrial arts I had an electric motor that we put together. Mine looked like a freaking ball of solder that rotated once or twice, so I passed. That's all I cared. So I said, well, get me a school that's the hell out of Memphis, because I was sick and tired of it. Memphis was an old place. It was Millington, Tennessee. And some of the windows were broken and it snowed and the snow drifted in the barracks. And the place was full. It was absolutely full of Navy and Marine training because we went to the same schools. So I said, get me the hell out of Memphis. Give me a school that's short. And they said, well, we got this school here. It's 12 weeks. It's in Georgia, Glencoe. They used to have a big blimp base there. And they said, it'll be 12 weeks and you're going to be one of these guys in the control towers that wear these cool glasses. I says, well, what is ACGCA? Well, he said, I think it's air control. He said, read this paragraph. So I did, and I got to school and got through the school. I wasn't the best. I was towards the middle bottom of the class, but I passed. And then from there, I was assigned Cherry Point, North Carolina, which was a training base for controllers and everybody else. And it was a fairly busy place, but a lot of squadrons are training to go to Vietnam. But there were many, many, many people there because the Marine Corps was starting to flood different fields with every military occupational specialty called MOS. And the place was full. You'd have to wait in line just to get chow for sometimes an hour. And then I got to the radar unit. They first are going to put me in the tower, but then the powers to be said, we need these Marines that are controllers to be ready to either do radar or tower. So then I went back down to Glencoe and trained in radar. I got to the bottom of my class, but I made it. But I knew what I was doing. I knew it would be all right from that point. So I went back to Cherry Point and I got fed up with waiting in line behind 5 or 6 other gentlemen on the crew just to talk to an airplane. I said, this is crap. I said, I want to go to Vietnam. And a master sergeant said, you don't want to go there. People are getting killed, but it didn't register with me at all. But it was a guy that came back from Vietnam that was kind of in trouble that I talked to. He said, Dan, you know, if you go to Vietnam, you could probably go on leave anywhere in the free world you want to if you extend for 6 months. I said, aha, I think that's what I'll end up doing if I go to the right place. Lucky for me, I had written a term paper in my junior year about Australia. Of course, I didn't do well. I think I got a D plus. But I remembered all about Australia, the vastnesses and where was what and how to get there. So I understood what I was going to be doing. The other thing, interestingly enough, when I was a farm kid, I used to dream about Disneyland. Well, when I got to California, I got to go there too.
Nice.
Thank you, USMC. So I got orders and I got home. And I stopped to see my uncle in Fort Bragg. He was a master sergeant in the Green Beret. Spent a couple of days with him at the bar. I couldn't keep up, of course. So we kind of were talking about it and listened to some of these enlisted senior NCOs talking about their experiences with the Special Forces. Really kind of brought me home. There are some horror stories, nightmares, you name it. So I learned a little bit about what might lie ahead for me. So I came home and I was on my way. But for me, my good friend, first cousin, Dick Hayden, got married on the 1st of April, and I got to go to the wedding. I didn't really fit well in the sport coat they had to put me on. Like the Marines say, it kind of fit like a fart sack. But I went to the wedding and off to Vietnam I went. And here was the deal though. The Marines learned in Korea that we were all infantrymen and they did not want anybody to go over there that didn't know how to perform as an infantryman. So we were going to go to Camp Pendleton for 5 weeks. That's 5 weeks of humping the hills with all kinds of different military occupational specialties or MOS, like I mentioned before. We had machine gunners, we had snipers, we had everybody, we had controllers, mechanics, drivers. We all went through the same stuff. And we requalified everything from C4, night maneuvers, recoilless rifles on down. And after 5 weeks, they shipped us out. And this kind of hit home. A little side note, I had a foot injury that I had stitches on, and going through Pendleton, it was kind of infected a little bit. It kind of leaked through my hush puppies, don't you know? So what I ended up doing was I was going into sick bay and I thought I wasn't going to get on the damn plane. So like a fool, I ripped up my sheet and got to go. And everybody says, "What the hell are you doing here?" I says, "I'm on my way now, ain't going back." When I got there, everything worked fine, healed up, but you did not know where you were going. We all went through Hawaii on the way. We stopped for a fueling stop. That was fine, but another thing, they kept us in a kind of a penned in area and we changed planes and these lovely Hawaiian ladies came up to us, putting leis on our across our neck and our shoulders, but they were crying. They were all crying. And it kind of hit home a little bit because they figured some of us wouldn't make it back. Then after that, we went to Okinawa, where we went to a Marine base and we stored our winter uniforms. And they said to us, "Store them here. They'll be here when you get back, if you get back. Some of you will not come back." The Marines always hit you in the right between the eyes with reality, and that's just fine. So we stayed in Okinawa for 2, 3, 4 days. And then we flew into Da Nang. Da Nang in the I Corps, the Northern Corps, was where all the Marines flew into and they got processed out. I didn't know which base I was going to go to because I knew people that had been at other places. There was Quezon, there was Quang Tri, there was Dang Ha, all up near the DMZ, and there was Fubai. And then there were a couple of VFR towers where we had people also sorting out helicopters. And we also had a couple people at hot LZs where they were handling, helicopters coming in and out. I think I might have lucked out because I got sent to Chulai. Chulai was a huge base located in southern I Corps. It was where the Marine 3rd Division was located. And the 1st Marine Aircraft Wing, we had a whole host of helicopters up on Kiha. Shortly after I got there, we ended up, the Marines moved north and the AmeriCal moved in. That was in 1967, probably spring to summer. We'd been through our first TET by then. I got in a little bit of trouble when I got there. I was used to drinking beer. And we had this little party out down on the beach. They had steaks and everything else. And beer was about a dime or free. So hell, I probably had too much. And this old gunnery sergeant I found later, he was an alcoholic. He was going to take a bunch of us out to the village on a patrol. It was unauthorized. So I went along being stupid. And we got picked up by a patrol and they said, "You're not authorized here." Everybody in the group got written up and got bad efficiency reports because it was a stupid thing to do by a bunch of drunken idiots. I lucked out, I think. They ended up giving me a month of mess duty and a month of guard duty. I didn't know this. I was a corporal at the time. I was to be promoted to sergeant the next day in E5. They took me upstairs and they had me look down and they had me read my warrant. And then this major, he was the executive officer of the group. I think he was a grunt. He looked at me and said, "Well, now how do you feel, Corporal Callahan?" And he ripped that thing up in front of me in about 32 pieces, like something you'd see in the movie. It took me about a year and a half to get my sergeant back, and I did get out to the unit, and I heard the staff NCO saying, "Well, we better see if that guy out there is worth a shit and if he can control traffic." Well, after they found out I could, and I got checked out, and I started training guys and doing my thing. And I ended up with the nickname Dirty Dan the Radar Man, and I lived it. I did my thing. I did extend to go to Australia. I went to Perth, and I went all the way across. That'll be a story for another time. But I hitchhiked and rode a bus. Had a wonderful time. And then after I did that, I extended. My good friend James E. Lott came. He came from Cherry Point to Vietnam. I didn't know him much before, but I got to know him as a close friend after that. He arrived in October of '67. I worked with him. I checked him out and did all I could, and we became real close friends. In fact, we had plans after we left Vietnam, what we might do. I might not have ever come home. That was just what happened, just how I was back then. So we're rolling along. We're getting fine. I ended up getting sent to Penang, Malaysia on my first R&R. I wasn't going to go. I had it in my mind to save all my pay and buy a farm when I got out. I was running the numbers and all this stuff. But then my buddy got killed May 8th of 1968 with a rocket attack. They blew up the whole damn unit and sent about half of the guys into the hospital. They were wounded. Some were pretty bad. And my good friend lost his life. I hope to be able to show you the video when we went to the wall 50 years later, but it ended up hit us dead center. And I was lucky. I missed it by about a minute because I was the old guy. I drove the goddamn truck to get the chow and was on my way back across the runway. And then after that, we got a few guys come in from other bases to help us out. But that kind of changed my whole outlook on life and everything else. Jimmy Lott and I kind of had a little pact going. We said, well, if one of us goes, the other's going to carry on, regardless. And the other isn't going to be mourning a long time. And that's the way I took it. And since then, I don't. I know I should, but I don't get into that mode. Even when my father died, I said, I'll handle it. And maybe it's the wrong attitude, but that's me. So Kiwi left us. And then I said, Callahan, you stupid, you know what they'd say. Now you get 6 more months. But it was more than 6 months because the month you were gone counted. So it was actually 7 months you had to spend. So I'm tooling along, doing my thing, training people and bringing down aircraft into the runway and all that stuff. And then I was getting towards the end of my 18 or 19 months. The Marines had to stay 13 months, by the way. So it was 20 months by the time I got. So I was getting close to the end. So I extended for another 3 months. And I got an early out when I got home. But we got hit twice, TET 67 and 68 were bad. And my friend got killed, actually what they call a mini TET. I didn't know this till I read or saw Mr. Burns's videos, and I realized that was it. So that's how that happened. So I got home and I wasn't ready to come home, and that's another story I'll go with Jim, but
Yeah, we'll get into that a different time for
I
sure.
took my time getting home, and I wasn't ready. I worked ag-related jobs, and just what I did. Wasn't making a lot of money, but I was drinking every damn weekend. I'd make it and spend it. I think when I was home that brief time and displaced my sisters and went back in my old bedroom, I don't think it set too well. And I was kind of tough to get along with as well, and I'll be the first to admit that. But every weekend I'd drink up whatever I made, and had some automobile troubles, in and out, whatever. But I'm not the only one. When I talk to veterans, and I talk to quite a few, many have gone through the same thing, many. So that's my story. Then I was fortunate enough to get hired by the FAA, and I spent a career in air traffic, and we'll get into that later. But I did my job. I was a controller, and then the last 20 years I was a soup and an operations manager. And I always did my thing. My wife says, "Did you ever really work for anybody?" I said, "Not really." I said, if you do your job and pay attention, usually you're fine. People don't have to micromanage you at all. And I didn't believe in that myself. So Semper Fi and hang in there.
Before we do go, if you don't mind, I just have a couple of questions I
Yes,
want to
sir.
ask you. What would be some advice or, what young people that are learning about the Vietnam conflict, what's something that you would want them to know about as they're studying it? Because there's obviously been a lot written about it and, there's some unfavorable things out there, but from your perspective, what should a young person know that's learning about that?
Well, to realize that most of us went there, at least initially, we thought it was for a purpose. And we actually felt that it was going to be like the occupation of Japan. We were wrong, because a lot of times the politicians had made deals and stopped things before they happened. And that was it. And the combat Marine had a different idea. Vietnam was different for many people, because some were way in the rear, some were near the front, some were in the bush and the mud and the blood and all that stuff. We're a big base. We get hit once in a while, but we're so doggone big we never knew. But they had us zeroed in from the start. They wanted communication and that. As far as advice, understand what it meant. Understand when it started. It actually started in 1946 with the CIA in there, the forerunner of the CIA. There were people in there working with the Viet Minh and Ho Chi Minh, and they didn't want to let the communist Chinese in, but they supported the French, and that ended up causing some problems and put us right smack in the middle. And we just kept putting money and money and money and money into the place, and that's how she ended. I do want to comment, though, a lot of the veterans, when they got home, because of bad press and everything else, were given a rough time.
Mhm.
We weren't really welcomed home. I'll never forget, I went to a bar with my dad in Lee Sewer, Minnesota, and I had my BDU on, my camouflage one, with a pair of jeans, because I had some left over, and that's what I wore. And somebody must have said something to him, because when we left, he said, "Well, Danny, the war is over for you. You can kind of take that uniform off whenever." And that hit me kind of hard, but my dad being a World War II vet, it was a different time. It was a different era, and some struggled. I mean, I didn't have a whole lot of trouble getting along, because I wouldn't take it, but some struggled and had a difficult time. And some were not only left with the stain of Agent Orange, but they had mental problems. And some of these problems, I was talking to a couple of veterans, have come to rest after they got older, after they got done with their job, after they retired, and they had time to think about it. Because when they were raising their family, they were working hard, and they didn't have time to think about much except keep things going. And maybe as a vet, they're drinking a little bit too much too. I certainly can identify with that. And that's just the way it went. So we mainly want understanding. I feel bad. I enlisted, I volunteered, and I wanted to get into the Marines and all that stuff. It was a different scenario. But I know young men that were my age that I knew well that got drafted and thrown right in the frickin' breach. And unlike the Marine Corps, when the Army came home, a lot of times you were looking at, you're there a year, but if you had around 18, 19 months, they discharge you. And they'd take you to the West Coast, either to Travis Air Force Base or somewhere up around Seattle, and they discharge you. And there you were with your red dirty battle dress uniform. That was it. And you were released. At least with us, they kind of softened it up a little bit and try to look at you to see if you're plumb crazy or just a little crazy, but that was all right. But I think what we need to have is maybe understanding. Somebody asked me, how long did it take before somebody said, welcome home? I said, well, maybe 15 years ago, but it was another veteran. And we always say that to one another. As Marines, we see a Marine, we say Semper Fi, and it usually sparks a conversation. So I think, especially the older generation, we just need understanding. For some, it was somebody else's war. Many people suffered, many people died. I'm not going to get into stats, but it's all in here. On my way today to see Jim, I had to stop. They've got a stone out at the monument in Arlington for my good friend, Jim Lott. And I've got one in New Prague and 3 or 4 other places throughout the country because I miss him.
I'm gonna ask you one last thing before we wrap up. What do you remember about kind of what was going through your head, and what kind of adjustment period was it like when you first got there? Because you came from, working on the farm in small town Minnesota, and then all of a sudden you're out, and I'm sure it's about 1,000 degrees, and you're in the jungle. And how did you adapt, and what was going through your head at that time, from what you can remember?
Well, we started working 24 on and 24 off, and that's what we did. And after I got through with my punishment, at least nothing went on my record. So, and then we spent time at the club, and we sometimes start in at 8 o'clock in the morning. We got the sirens and we got hit once in a while, but you worked your 24 and there really wasn't any other duty. It was different depending on what job you had and where you were in country, what all you did. So that was it. It kind of got to be routine. You went out and did your stuff. The weather was bad. We went, for you pilots, we went IFR during the monsoon for 100 days. And the visibility was always less than a mile. We always had to bring them in on a precision approach. I can remember bringing the dust off crew in down the runway with minimums, and then they'd scud run up the hill to get to the hospital, which by then was an Army hospital. Also, I need to tell you that I was there, and less than 2.5 miles from where I was billeted, there were 2 nurses that I went to high school with in New Prague. They were there. I did not know much. I didn't go there because as Marines enlisted, we were told not to fraternize. So I went once when a buddy of mine was in the hospital, and I won't say what he was there for, and talked to one briefly, and then the other one relieved her. One of them has PTSD big time. I hope she gets help. The other one stayed in, and she was a full bird colonel when she retired as a flight nurse in the Air Force. So she probably found necessary counseling if she needed it. Whereas the other one was a farm gal, right back. And as I found out, people just didn't frickin' understand. And to this day, there's still people that don't understand. We understand each other. We're not looking for sympathy or an easy road to anything, but it's troubling to me because a lot of my friends have Agent Orange, and they're all waiting for the other shoe to drop, so to speak, as I am too. I'm not a fatalist. I want to hang around for a while, but you just don't know. And that's true with everybody. So,
All right. Well, thanks so much for doing this. We're gonna get together again here shortly and talk about his leave in Australia, and then also when you got out too, and
Journey home.
yep, your journey home. So this is part one of a three-part series. So thanks for tuning in. Thanks so much for doing this.
Thank you, Jim. Catch you later. Well, that's pretty good.